Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening. My name is Derek A. Walt. I'm a Senior Channel Sales Manager at Digimarc and will be your moderator for this 15-minute session. This session is titled How Hybrid Digital Printing Delivers Item-Level Traceability at Scale. It will be presented by Jay Sperry, Global Digital Transformation Leader at Digimarc. If you have questions for Jay specific to today's topic, please type them into the chat, and Jay will answer as many questions as possible at the end of the session. So without further ado, Mr. Jay Sperry.
All right, Derek, thanks. I was happy I was able to see the participants in the room. There's some familiar names and some new ones. So hopefully meet some new friends through this. So like Derek said, today we're going to talk about some of the recent work we've been doing in industrial inkjet and to deliver Digimarc, serialized Digimarc. Some of you might have just been to Larry's presentation a few minutes ago where he talked about some of the 3D work and a brief history of Digimarc. One slide here to show the depth of experience at Digimarc and security, as well as what we're talking about today, which is our packaging, really the packaging focus of our business. Many of you have heard of our Watermark before, the static Watermark. And by the way, if you, we have an app for free on your phone. It's the Digimarc Discover app. If you download that, you can actually scan these. These are all enhanced. So on the left, this is an example label that actually has Digimarc enhanced in it. And then this is showing you here an example of how good the coverage is. So this is a really robust, scanning mark. What we're able to do then is to serialize that, and so that each label in this case has a unique identity. And so if you got clever and you actually cropped out this on the slides, you find that each one of these labels had a unique serial number. Well, to do serialized printing, we need digital. And so most packaging today still is not printed digital. And so how do we solve that? Well, one thing that's always been of interest for me back to my graduate student days at Clemson has been hybrid printing and how to integrate digital printing within the operations of flexo and gravure printing. This has been mostly common in some finishing equipment as well as some labels. In the labeling industry, there are some commercial players that do quite well. What I want to share with you today is some of the things that we learned that are relatively new. One is that I was impressed that we can print up to 2,000 feet per minute with these industrial inkjet printers, which opens up the ability to move into some other industries. It's not cheap. If you want to go wider, you stack these things up, but you can do it. It is possible, and it's even possible in multicolor. But for single color, something very interesting. Why is this of interest, particularly to Digimarc? We found out through this work is that we use a significant amount less ink than a traditional QR code or data matrix code that you would use for inkjet printing. Well, what that opens up is the speed. So we found from vendors telling us that they can print faster. They can meet the demands of flexible packaging on high-speed flexo presses because we only use 20% of the ink of a QR code in this example here. Now, this is a really robust code that I have in this slide. And once again, you can scan this. And so what that does is that allows you to run faster. At the same time, and goes way back to, many of you remember the Walmart initiative to remove inkjet barcodes from corrugated packaging due to the problems associated with that in the plant printing codes. And so in this example, a few missing inkjet nozzles that would destroy a QR code, or low ink density. I've seen these come in just barely printed, right at an ink change. And then lastly here, damage. This could be smudged, this could be torn, any sort of damage that happens. In all three of these cases, the Digimarc or the digital watermark still performs. And so you can imagine that in these often environmental conditions that are not ideal for digital printing, and the fact that you have this redundancy and you have this backup really creates additional benefits for digital watermarking in industrial inkjet printing. The third benefit here is, you might have seen it right away, is the cost. You know, what I'm showing you here is a really robust watermark. I'm going to show you an example in a second of a very light one that's probably even, 30% of this. And so it's not only, what we've heard is, it's not only the ink savings, which is easy, by the way. If you go to a plant and you say, how much do you spend on ink to print these codes? You just take that number and you times it by 0.2, and that's what you'll be spending with the digital watermarks on ink, assuming the same size. But more importantly, you don't have to change the ink, but 10 times, a tenth of the amount of time. So the opportunity for errors of changing ink and the sort of the consumable drag and the printing has some benefits as well. And then lastly, this goes along somewhat to the core of our of the value proposition around covertness when we print with traditional printing and color separations. But with inkjet printing, in this example here, which you see is, this is the AIPIA logo with a very light Digimarc digital watermark laid on top of it, overprinted. And you could do this with an industrial inkjet printer. And if you scan that label there, it has significant performance with a mobile phone. Some of you might, you could do it now. If you downloaded the app, you should be able to shoot that and it would take you to the program website. And so if you have an area, especially a tight area where you're printing Best Buy dates, for instance, what we found is, and I wish I could show it here, but it's not ready to show publicly, is the ability to put, auto scanning, auto identification, digital watermark codes behind those Best Buy dates and expiry dates, even at some small sizes, to really add the digitalization to what most packaging companies today still use human readable codes for. So I've put a summary slide here together, is that the serialization of packaging requires digital printing. The flexo and gravure printing infrastructure out there is enormous for packaging. And what we've demonstrated here is that the inkjet systems can be added to these flexo and gravure lines to add the digitization of packaging that is going to be required here in the next decade. And so you have this hybrid printing approach. What we've demonstrated here is that inkjet printing of digital watermarks is not only feasible, which is the first consideration, it offers competitive benefits. And even can open to new markets where you couldn't add industrial inkjet before due to speed limitations. Well, if you can print with 20% of the ink, does that open up the ability now to put codes, auto identification codes on packaging that you couldn't have before? And then lastly, at Digimarc, we have demonstrated this across a wide range of industrial inkjet printing systems and packaging substrates. And there's a few that you will be able to find in market soon enough. And if you follow the social media, you'll see some demonstrations of this already. And you'll start to realize how we're adding the serialization in many cases is through this hybrid digital printing approach. So that closes out my 10-minute presentation. I have Derek here who's monitoring the chat box, and we can ask some questions, hopefully answer some questions. Go ahead and pile them in now. If you have any, we have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Jay, we got a message that the Q&A section is not working properly. So if you do have a question, you can always try to post in the room chat. But I did have one question, or actually 2 questions for you. Are there specific resolution requirements for digitally printing serialized watermarks?
Yeah, so we get asked the question a lot around, is this a high resolution type situation? And the answer is no. It all depends on how much you want to hide the code. And so if you, just like with traditional printing, you can imagine that if you're trying to print a nice graphic at a low line screen, you're going to see the pattern. And the same with Digimarc. Up at 600 DPI, 1200 DPI, one of our partners has done a lot of work there. You can really hide the code from the eye because the dot size gets so small. But even at 72 DPI and even lower, we seem to have success. But you're actually going to see some of the elements of the code.
Okay, Jay, we have a question in the chat. The question is, what is your experience with using the code with consumer goods? Do consumers encounter issues to try to understand where to scan? We are most familiar with QR-like codes nowadays. Could you address that, please?
Yeah, so this is so a lot of the work that we're doing here is not for consumer engagement. So we're not trying to get a consumer, for instance, to scan this code to go to a particular website. This is most often used for use cases like auto identification, where you're training systems to identify packaging. Recycling sortation is a big one now. When you have detectors that are going to rely on detecting the code, and you want it to be serialized and you want it to have be in consumer goods. I think that maybe the question was, yeah, I mean, these applications we're talking about, these are SKUs that are in the billions of quantities, something that digital printing still weighs off. So these are consumer goods, high volume, fast moving consumer goods that want to add digitalization for product authentication, for auto identification.
Okay, next question is there a way to serialize the code? Can you just expand a little bit more on that process?
Yeah, this whole presentation was demonstrating that it is serialized. Yes, the code is serialized. Basically, every single label, in this case, let's say you had 1 billion produce labels, you would have 1 billion unique IDs. Every single label will have a unique digital watermark printed with an industrial inkjet printer.
Okay, next question for you, Jay. Is Digimarc working with third-party app providers who can manage and provide intelligent data as product moves through supply chain?
Yes, absolutely. I think if you go even to our website, there's some partners listed there with some stories. You can go online even and search some of the different companies. Everything was a company that we do a lot of partnership with. Many of you may have saw the press release yesterday where there's some future combined synergies there. But even other third-party companies we've been working with for quite some time. Exactly that, to manage the auto identification, the database, et cetera.
Okay, one more question, Jay. Are there physical size requirements for the watermark?
So yeah, historically, the idea is around coverage, right? Digimarc wants to be used to increase coverage. We've had customers come to us and say, hey, we have a half inch tall character printer, and we want to add, can we print Digimarc? And the question is related to how do you want to scan it? So our code size, or tile size, if you saw on the slide, is related to how far away it needs to be scanned. And so if you have an application that can focus very closely, you can print our code very small. Our standard size that we try to define is roughly 3/4 of an inch, and that will measure very successfully from 4 to 7 inches away. All right on the time. Anything else, Derek? Thanks for helping with the questions, Derek, and thanks for all again for making the time. And You can find my information. If you want to ask any further questions, I'm available. We'll sign off.
Thank you, Jay.